What these records reveal is astonishing. The Bidens created over 20 shell companies, most of which were created when Joe Biden was vice president. Bank records so far show the Biden family, their business associates, and their companies received over $10 million from foreign nationals and related companies. What were the Bidens selling? Nothing but influence and access to the Biden network.
Well, it's a big day for the House Oversight Committee, with two IRS whistleblowers making bombshell statements about the investigation into Hunter Biden. Gary Shapley and Joseph Ziegler have worked with the federal tax agency each for over 10 years and testified before the committee on their experience investigating the president's son's potential tax crimes. In late May, both Shapley and Ziegler sat for a 5-hour closed interview with the House Ways and Means Committee to share how they thought the investigation was handled. Specifically, Mr. Shapley has claimed in his 14-year experience at the IRS, it was handled differently to any other case he'd worked on. And why is that? Well, House Republicans will say it's because of the Biden name. For context, Hunter Biden had been under federal investigation out of Delaware since 2018 for potentially committing tax crimes, money laundering, and lying on a form in relation to buying a firearm. What this investigation opened, though, was a tangled web of overseas business deals Hunter Biden was involved in, where he received foreign transactions from Chinese, Ukrainian, and Romanian companies. Gary Shapley had been leading the tax violation aspect of the investigation since 2020 as a supervisory agent, but had alleged it was interfered with, he was blocked from seeing evidence and interviewing witnesses, and the charges his team wanted to lay were dismissed. A goal of this hearing is also for House members to figure out if Joe Biden himself has been compromised in these schemes and whether US national security has been threatened. Jason Smith, who was the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, opened his remarks with what he learnt from the whistleblowers' testimony that they gave to the committee in late May. Despite the fact that Hunter Biden reached what has been called a sweetheart plea deal with the Justice Department over his tax violations, his charges were meant to be far worse. We remember that after a 5-year investigation, the president's son will only plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax charges related to 2017 and 2018. But they weren't the only tax years in question.
The IRS recommended multiple felony charges against Hunter Biden for tax years 2014 through 2019, relating to at least $8.3 million in income from foreign companies.
So what does Democratic Ranking Member Jamie Raskin think of the Republicans' investigation into the Biden family?
One thing you will not hear today is any evidence of wrongdoing by President Joe Biden or his administration. Like every other try by our colleagues to concoct a scandal about President Biden, this one is a complete and total bust.
In 2021, there was an agreement between both prosecutors and investigators that Hunter Biden would be charged with felony counts related to tax years from 2014 to 2018. But then a different plea deal was eventually made with the DOJ, and there was no felony charges laid against the president's son.
In March of 2022, the prosecutors requested discovery from the investigative team and presented the case to the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. In later meetings in early August of 2022, the assigned prosecutors, all 4 attorneys, agreed to recommend felony and misdemeanor charges for the 2017, 18, and 19 tax years, insofar as the Department of Justice Tax Division attorney sent an email about the process of bringing charges to include felony and misdemeanor tax charges in 2 separate districts, Delaware and Los Angeles. Less than a month later, Gary Shapley and I met with Mr. Weiss. He stated that he agreed with us regarding the 2014 and 2015 tax year misdemeanor and felony charges, but that this could somehow affect the later year misdemeanor and felony charges that he conveyed were stronger. Despite these facts, the plea deal that is being discussed occurred. To this day, I do not have a reason why that occurred. From my perspective, this might not have been problematic had the investigation been handled in the ordinary course.
In earlier testimonies made, it was alleged Delaware U.S. Attorney David Weiss, who was leading the overall investigation, requested special counsel status so that he could file charges outside of his jurisdiction. That's because there was potential crimes made in both California and D.C. According to the whistleblowers, unpaid taxes from 2014 and 2015 related to income from Ukrainian gas company Burisma Holdings were left to expire because they had a statute of limitations on them.
Would have been about $125,000 that Hunter Biden would have had to pay on the $400,000 of income. Is that correct, Mr. Chavley?
That's correct.
Mr. Ziegler?
Yes, that's correct.
And you've had no evidence in all the records that you've looked at that those taxes were ever paid?
No, they were not.
Yeah, no, they were not paid by Hunter Biden.
The statute of limitations was allowed to run. Mr. Chapley, you go on to state that in order for him to pay this, he'd have to pay it voluntarily, that the government doesn't have a way to compel him to pay it because they've allowed the statute of limitations. It's not he got out of criminal, he got out of having to pay the tax, right?
That's correct. The civil and criminal statute of limitations have expired for that tax year.
So he has in his pocket $125,000 of money that should have gone to the federal government as taxes. When in the state of Ohio, you've got average family earning about $62,000 a household. That's like 2 full households of tax income that he got to keep in his pocket.
Biden appointed Attorney General Merrick Garland under oath claimed that David Weiss had every authority to lay charges and orchestrate his own investigation that would not be interfered with. But he also denied that David Weiss ever requested special counsel status. But whistleblower Joseph Ziegler, who keep in mind is a Democrat, disagrees.
What I experienced that the U.S. Attorney in Delaware in our investigation was constantly hamstrung, limited, and marginalized by DOJ officials as well as other U.S. attorneys.
Next up is Gary Shapley's testimony, the man who led the probe since 2020 and has worked for the IRS for 14 years. When he originally came forward with allegations against the way the investigation was handled, he and his entire team of 12 agents were ordered by the DOJ to step down and were replaced by another team. He claimed that move was the retaliation that he was worried about when he came forward. Today is no different. He lays it all out.
At every stage, decisions were made that benefited the subject of this investigation. For example, prosecutors concealed contents of Hunter Biden's laptop from investigators. DOJ slow-walked steps to include interviews, serving document requests, and executing search warrants. Warrants that were ready as early as April of 2020, but were delayed until after the November 2020 election and never pursued. Investigators were not allowed to follow up on WhatsApp messages from Hunter Biden's Apple iCloud backup, where he suggested he was sitting next to his father. Assistant United States Attorney Leslie Wolf cited the optics of executing a search warrant at President Biden's residence as a deciding factor for not allowing it, even though she agreed that probable cause existed. Prosecutors instructed investigators not to ask about the big guy or dad when conducting interviews. The Biden transition team was tipped off about interviews the night before the investigation went overt, a fact my FBI counterpart confirmed to this committee in a recent testimony, where the result was that only one witness spoke to investigators that day. These are just some of the examples of how our investigation was stymied.
So on June 20 this year, when a plea deal was made between Hunter Biden and the Justice Department, Gary Shapley's felony charges weren't included. The IRS whistleblower was asked if he was surprised by that.
United States Attorney Weiss also agreed with these because he went to the DC U.S. Attorney to ask him to partner. You don't ask someone to partner with you if you don't yourself agree with those charges. And when he got denied that, he requested special authority and was declined, as he said in the October 7th, 2022 meeting.
So if David Weiss was in on these charges being laid out, then what happened? Well, he originally claimed that he had all the authority to be the decision maker, and then according to Gary Shapley, Attorney Weiss walked into a meeting on October 7, 2022 and said the opposite.
Yes, he told me he was not the deciding person on whether or not charges were filed. He told us that DC U.S. Attorney had declined to allow charges. He told us that he had requested special counsel authority from Maine DOJ and denied that authority.
And was denied.
That's correct.
Were you the only guy in that meeting?
I was not.
How many other people were there?
There were 7 total people, including me.
You and Mr. Weiss and 5 others, right?
That's correct.
And have any of them come forward and say what you just said is not true?
They have not.
No one has, right?
That is
no
correct.
one has disputed, refuted. No one said what you said is not true.
That's
and did you
correct.
memorialize what took place in that meeting? Did you memorialize that?
Yes, I did. That day when I returned home from the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office, I put it in an email to the 2 senior executives at my agency.
You put it in an email that day.
That's correct.
One of the biggest side stories related to this is the fact that a few months ago it was alleged the FBI had in their possession an FD 1023 form that details a criminal bribery scheme that Joe Biden was involved in. It alleges a highly credible human source detailed to the FBI that Joe Biden, while serving as the vice president, could have been bribed by a foreign national in exchange for government policy decisions. It was later detailed that the foreign national could have been an executive from Burisma Holdings, which is the same company Hunter Biden sat on the board of and was paid millions of dollars. The form dates back to June 2020, but Gary Shapley was not given access to this alleged document, despite the fact that he was investigating payments made to Hunter Biden from Burisma Holdings that the president's son did not declare to the IRS. So what would Mr. Shapley have done if he had access to this document?
Since I've never seen the document, I only know what's been reported.
Right.
So I can say that there were investigative steps that involved President Biden that were not allowed to be taken, and that information like this would have been really helpful to have from investigators, by investigators when we received any pushback, when we were asked to take names out of document requests or search warrants. It would have been nice to have information that showed why, that helped prove why those names needed to be in those requests.
Both IRS whistleblowers gave bombshell answers when they were asked about other evidence related to the investigation into Hunter Biden's taxes that they weren't allowed to review.
One piece was the Hunter Biden laptop. What Assistant United States Attorney Leslie Wolf told us on that day, I think it was September 3rd of 2020, and that's that they had information from the laptop that they were not providing to the investigators.
There was an environment when we were interviewing witnesses where you were afraid to ask questions that could lead to the presidential campaign. And this is after the campaign's over. So questions like that, it was restricted, and so things like that we were limited to talking about.
But as you'd expect in this hours-long congressional hearing, not everyone on both sides of the political aisle think these testimonies needed to occur.
Glad somebody brought up the word suspicious activity, because that's just what's taking place in this room. Make no mistake about it. And I want to congratulate my colleagues from across the aisle for gathering us here today, almost distracting us from the biggest investigation that is going on right now in our country and in our nation's history, involving the former president and the front runner for the Republican nomination.
Agents investigating Hunter Biden were gearing up to interview him in December 2020 after his father had won the presidential election. This interview never went ahead.
The FBI SSA and I were assigned with interviewing Hunter Biden that day. And the day previous, we went to the LA FBI field office and asked them to the special agent in charge to contact the Secret Service special agent in charge from the LA field office at 8 a.m. on the morning of December 8th and tell them that two agents were going to approach Hunter Biden as part of an official investigation. And the night before, all of that changed.
And all of that changed because FBI headquarters and Secret Service headquarters coordinated, and that information had gotten out to everybody the night before. Did you ever get to interview Hunter Biden?
We did not interview him.
There is speculation that Joe Biden was involved in Hunter Biden's business deals. Hunter's former business partner, Tony Bobulinski, even said that Joe Biden acted as a chairman in the Biden family businesses. One of the quotes circulating was that the big guy would receive a 10% stake in a venture with Chinese energy company CEFC. Tony Bobulinski said Joe Biden was the big guy. But is that what the IRS whistleblowers think?
When we're preparing for that interview and we're referencing that email, 10 held by H for the big guy, and from what I understand that to be his dad, President Biden.
Who did you take dad to be? When she refers to dad?
The father of the subject is President Biden.
President Biden.
Now, keep in mind, while all of this is taking place, Joe Biden has long maintained that he's never spoken to his son Hunter about his overseas business deals. Democratic Congressman Dan Golden attempted to probe Gary Shapley on that, but accidentally confirmed that Biden had spoken to his son.
And you testified that he said that Hunter told his dad, according to Rob Walker, quote, I may be trying to start a company or try to do something with these guys. Now, let me ask you something. That doesn't sound much like Joe Biden was involved in whatever Hunter Biden was doing with the CEFC if Hunter Biden is telling him that he's trying to do business with them, does it?
No, but it does show that he told his father he was trying to do business. And he was
Okay,
talking
well,
to
that
his
is
father
true. Hunter Biden
about the
does
business.
try to do business. That's correct.